So today I want to explore something interesting, how rebellion can be positive when it comes to overcoming the mother and father complex and finally becoming the author of your life. So someone under the influence of the parental complex is usually identified with the Puer and Puer Aeternus archetype. In other words, they have a childish view of the world and relationships, and this is the main factor behind their struggles in life. And I already have a whole series about it, so I won't go into detail over here, but I will link it for you here and also down below. But the basic idea you have to understand about the mother and father complex is that they generate fixed scripts in our minds. And these scripts are like a map to navigate the world, and they contain rules about what's acceptable or not regarding our career, studies, relationships, so what partner you should go after, what kind of partner is acceptable or not, what emotions are okay or not to express, which hobbies are useful or not, and even a global idea of God. And that's why some people immediately assume that these scripts are bad. But when we are kids, they're necessary for us to make sense of the world and learn how to behave. But as we grow up, these scripts often start to become a hindrance because they usually come with fears, limitations, and values that have nothing to do with our authentic personalities. And consequently, we don't get to develop our talents to their fullest extent and lead a childish existence under the parental shadow and constantly repeating their patterns and mistakes. And also, while we are operating through these assumptions about the world, we also can't find our true character as we didn't author these values and beliefs. It's not our creation. So, how can we finally grow up and become the author of our lives? Well, the solution is to challenge the parental scripts and create new narratives. But to do so, we must take responsibility for our actions and decisions and have our own experiences. We must gather experiential evidence that favors a new narrative. But becoming the creator of our lives doesn't mean simply throwing everything away, all the values and lessons you learned from your parents. Because if you follow this path, you are still blindly living your life in reaction to the parental complex. So it's not a conscious decision. So going against the parents and defying them just for the sake of defying them is childish and shallow. In reality, you have to separate the wheat from the chaff because even good values won't feel like they are yours if you don't devote time to understanding why they're particularly important to you. Now, a lot of people get stuck because they're expecting growing up to be a one time thing. And they need to have everything figured out before taking the first step. But this is completely backward because maturing is a process and it requires real life experience. So, in other words, to experience the birth of a new personality, we have to get used to making our own decisions and enduring the consequences for good or for worse. And we must gather evidence along the way, by following the career we desire, creating what we think is important, and building the relationships we want. And I know it's crazy, but a lot of people prefer remaining in a non shitty situation just because it's comfortable instead of opening themselves to something new. And yeah, the unknown can be scary, but it's also the realm of new possibilities and endless potential. And we will have to sacrifice the constant search for comfort and get our hands dirty because maturing comes from living life and not simply daydreaming about it. Especially because we usually hang on to a childish view of the world precisely because we are afraid of this unknown and bearing the responsibility of creating our own lives. And this is the main fear of the Puer Aeternus. But we must stop expecting to see a clear path and start carving it. Now, I know that a lot of people watching this video right now might be thinking, well, I try living my life, but I still feel stuck and completely lost. And this might be true, especially if you are over 30. But perhaps you didn't realize the unconscious influence of the parental complex and how the poor mentality might have affected your decisions and your whole life until now. So, in other words, you are probably leading what Carl Jung calls a provisional life. So, despite having a career and even a family, many people still secretly feel like a child trapped in an adult's body. So they are still living in the confines of the parental shadow and engaging with the world with narratives that were formed when they were children. And these narratives affect all their choices, behaviors, and basically their whole lives. Because when you are enmeshed with the poor mentality, there is a part of you still waiting for permission and either looking for parental approval or trying to get back at them. And consequently, you never fully commit to your life tasks and you tend to play small. And even if you go big, you usually find a way to self sabotage because you're constantly afraid of making mistakes and don't have the courage to be who you truly are. But I must tell you that in the end, people feel lost because they're afraid of responsibility. They're afraid of truly owning their lives because when you do it, you completely lose the ability to play the victim card and you can't blame anybody else. Now, everything is up to you. So now I want to switch gears a bit and get to the rebel part. But before I do it, let me tell you that you can find step by step to integrate the shadow and conquer the Puer and Puer Aeternus in my accessible course Catabasis, the Shadow Integration Manual. And if you want to work one-on-one with me, you can also check my mentorship down below. So we all learn by mimicking, but eventually we have to start developing our own style. So here's what I mean. An example, everyone learns music by first playing famous songs. So we learn basic chords and melodies, the different shapes, different exercises, and practice everything to be able to play ready-made songs. However, most people stop once they dominate the basics. There's no instinct to learn anything else. And they are satisfied only playing other people's songs. And sadly, that's also how many people lead their lives. There's no originality, no craftsmanship, and no authoring. There's no creative instinct. But to carve our own paths, we must pay the price to develop our own styles. So when I thought about this metaphor, I also remember that when I was younger, my parents constantly pushed me to become a civil servant. And I even worked with them for a while, and I confess I was completely miserable. The truth is that I always wanted to have my own thing, but I was afraid to follow this instinct. And even after enrolling in a course I wanted, at the time music, I still tried to follow what they expected by trying to become a teacher, instead of doing my own thing, creating a school, for instance. And again, I felt miserable. It was only years later when I moved to Ireland that I gave myself permission to experiment. And well, I took a number of jobs like waiter, cook, selling ice cream, and even in a period of a garbage collector at some point. It was not my proudest moment and it was tough. But all of these experiences also made me want to take my life more seriously and study something I was very passionate about, which was psychology. And this was one of my options when I was younger, but I didn't go for it because of skewed religious views, let's say. And also, my parents had their own business for several years before they became civil servants, and I watched them struggle a lot, so I completely understand their concerns and how they're trying to protect me. Because, well, it wasn't easy for me to become an independent therapist on the internet. This is kind of crazy, but thank God I'm finally living the life I always wanted. But I will be honest and say that for some time I blamed my parents for all of my struggles in life. But this only made matters worse and I constantly felt impotent. It was only when I decided to fully take responsibility and create my own narratives that things started to change. So earlier I mentioned that rebelling just for the sake of rebelling is childish and shallow. However, part of this instinct is necessary. You just had to channel it correctly to effectively break the rules of the parental script and stop wanting their approval. Healthy rebellion is about facing your fears and daring to be who you truly are. Create your own values and shape your life according to your soul. And funny enough, when you present yourself as an adult, you also get the chance to build a healthy relationship with your parents. And that's why I say be a rebel. And lastly, I cover everything you need to know about how to conquer the poor and Puer Aeternus and overcome the mother and father complex in this series.